a new position and to reform on ground from which they could, with better hope, charge the crest of each cemetery hill. The trails of the left half battery were swung sharp and hard to the right, and the right half battery was hastily limbered to the rear and in darkness hurried to a new position on the left of the guns remaining in the works, so that the whole battery was once more effective, and this time with double canister, pouring most destructive, enfilading, demoralizing fire into a confused mass of the enemy. What he's saying is, when they're over there, as Avery's men are coming this way, because of the angles, it's only the left side of his battery is able to fire into Avery's men. If the right side started to fire, they'd be firing this way, and that we've got Union men up here. So what he does is he limbers up the right side of his battery and swings those guns around to his left so they can set up with a better angle towards Avery. Now, our quote from this, and I meant to say this in the beginning, this is a Union-centric tour. We've had two Confederate-centric tours previously to this one. We have this one. We have another Confederate-centric, and then we close out with two Union-centric, so it's even Steven. So I'm talking more about the Union lines and what they're experiencing versus Confederate. But the quote comes from the Confederate commander in charge of the North Carolinians out here in the field. Early on, Avery is going to be shot and killed. It's dark though, and nobody sees it happen. Somebody asked me if it happened in the football field. I honestly don't know. But it's somewhere out here. People don't see it because it's dark. He's on horseback. He shot off his horse. He pulls out a paper and a piece of paper, and he writes, "Major, tell my father I died with my face to the enemy." And he writes his name, Avery, at the bottom. He's talking to Major Tate, the next person in command that will move up to command that brigade here during this fight. He's found, that piece of paper is found, and at last check, that piece of paper was down in Richmond, the former Museum of the Confederacy. Now it's Civil War Museum, or I don't know the title. It's the big museum down near the Tredegar Works in Richmond. They have that piece of paper still that Avery wrote out here. So it's a very dramatic moment. That's why I use that quote. On they come. Again, you've got Avery's men are going to experience rifle fire from their left flank because you've got the 33rd, and they're coming up against the 41st New York here along this wall where we're standing. One Confederate that wrote about Avery going down, Clarence H. Hatton, was the Adjutant General Godwin's brigade. Godwin is actually going to, after this fight, Godwin is going to take over the brigade from Avery, and he's going to move up. Hatton is writing about Godwin in Confederate Veterans, but he references what happens over here. He wrote, "An incident in this charge in the capture of the crest of Cemetery Hill may be in place here. Colonel Avery, commanding the brigade, was killed in the very beginning of the charge, when Colonel Godwin took command of the brigade as the senior colonel and led it in the capture of the breastworks, being the first man over them. Nearly all the Federals were shot or fleeing. He was met by an intense giant of a man who rushed upon him with a club rifle and attempted to brain him. Colonel Godwin, throwing up his left arm, diverted the blow so it fell to the ground with such force that it broke the stock from the barrel. And before the man could recover, Godwin came down upon his sword, literally cutting the head in twain." So there's some ferocious hand-to-hand fighting that's going to go on behind us. Let's see. Again, I come out here with so much stuff, and I always forget stuff, and I'm trying not to do that. So, again, I go back to, a lot of people say the 11th Corps broke and ran. The 41st New York holds their ground, though. Over here, there's going to develop a gap. The 153rd holds their ground, too, but there's a gap somewhere in the line. What the 41st New York does is they refuse their left flank. Everybody understand what that means? They take a couple companies on their left and form it at a right angle to the main line. So they stay here. They don't break and run back over here. And this is the easier part of the hill to get up. But they hold this ground. I'll have another quote when we get up there with those guns to signify this. They hold their ground. The 153rd Pennsylvania over here to my left. They're the ones along that wall right there where that round came in and hit them lengthwise. They hold their ground. The units that break, and I use that because I don't know another word to use. I don't like that word, but the units over here to the far left at that corner over there, 75th, 107th, 25th Ohio, and then the 17th Connecticut, they do retreat back up the hill because that line is very thin. And again, they're outnumbered 2-1. The thing about the 17th Connecticut, everybody know their story on Barlow's Knoll on July 1st? Their commander, Colonel Douglas Fowler, he literally loses his head. A cannonball takes his head off. So you can imagine what these troops have gone through. They see that when it happens. And it's not just the guy gets shot and killed like you see in all the movies. The guy's head gets blown off. And so it's not just a matter of they broke and ran. They're doing their best. And I hate it that the 11th Corps sort of gets short shrift here again. Because I think they do the best they can. But questions before we take the easy route up the hill? Yes, sir.
Was there any engagement of the Iron Brigade and the guys over here on the...
Not that I know of, no. Although they are dug in over there, but there's not a lot of writing that I found of them doing anything. They could have very well provided some infantry fire into Avery's flank. I think when Avery turns, he's further this way and it's nighttime. So they write. There's one instance where the 153rd and part of the 41st New York are out front as skirmishers. And they can hear the fighting develop over here to the left because it starts over there and sort of rolls because of the swinging for the Confederates. Ames is down here and he's ordering his men to fire along this line. And the men along this line realize it's their skirmishers out front. He said, no, those are our men coming back through here. He says, no, they're not fire. It was their men. It's the skirmishers falling back in front of Avery's men. So there's a lot of confusion over here because it is nighttime. The Confederates lost dearly at night when Stonewall Jackson gets shot by 18th North Carolina. So these armies just don't like to fight at night. And I can understand why. And this, you got to think this is open ground too. If it's that dark and confusing in open ground, just think about when you're fighting in wood. So, questions before we move on? All right, we're going to go downhill and we're going to follow the